Conway the Machine, one of the most accurate names in hip-hop and music altogether, because this man truly is a machine. He just never stops dropping music. Somehow he just always has tons of material, working with a variety of different producers on most of his projects. This guy is just not stopping. He really is just going to keep going. And I'm not entirely mad at that, by the way. I'm not entirely for it either. I'm always somewhere in the middle. I think if you're going to completely flood out music in such a short period of time, it can really wane and impact your feelings on the previous music, and can sometimes just make some albums sound worse because the artist has progressed and it's only been like 3 months. And in this case, with this new album, it really has been like, what, 6 months or whatever? It's not been long. And before that, he had that little EP that he did with Alchemist. This guy, yeah, is just going to keep going. And the music, to be fair, has remained consistent. I still think he's the best, and at least my favourite Griselda member. Benny is creeping up close, to be fair, but I think Conway has been the most consistent since the beginning. His mixtapes, I think, are really good. I included one of them on my favourite of the entire 2010s overall. Everything, Everybody is Food, Everything is Food, whatever that one is, that first mixtape, I think is great. Loved his album from last year, and La Maquina is a pretty solid follow-up too. I don't know if this is exactly living up to the expectations I had going into it, but I still think there's a lot of quality here. The thing that's holding it back, which is exactly what I was saying before with artists dropping too much music in a short amount of time, is when you get that extra lens, that clarity becomes like 4K, and suddenly you're analyzing all the little things that you probably wouldn't have if it had been like a year, 18 months, 2 years since the last release. But the thing with this album here is that I'm just picking up on very similar themes that we've heard from Conway really up until this point, and has continued flooding his albums up until this point. That extra critical lens is unfair because a lot of artists do keep to the same topics, but it just does feel like Conway isn't varying things up just enough to make me completely engaged with what he's rapping about. That being said though, I can't fault the production at all. Like, the first 2 tracks have fantastic beats. He's rapping over these tracks really well. It's just really impressive to hear him rap over slightly more, jazzier and more accessible instrumentals in comparison to like his early days where it was just so grimy and gritty and dirty and gangster-ish. But he's managing to pair his usual lyrical themes with this type of production, and I think it's working pretty well. It's just such a shame that Blood Roses loses my interest just a little bit, because he's talking about people preying on his downfall, people waiting for him to stop, being the legend that he believes he is. It just kind of gets a bit repetitive, not just for a rapper like Conway, but just for rap music in general. How many songs have you heard like this? I'm just not sure I'm totally on board with Conway on this track. The track Clarity gets brave with some of his lines where he mentions like the back of the bus thing, and then says rolls I parked. Obviously a real clear reference to Rosa Parks. It's a pretty clever play on words, but I could imagine people hearing this line and thinking, nah, Conway, you took that one maybe a bit too far. Not that I think it's that offensive or anything, but I could imagine people looking at it and thinking, ooh, I don't know about that. And the thing is that he kind of addresses it immediately after. So he says, I'm sorry if that offended you, I'm going to get cancelled and all that kind of stuff. It just kind of diminishes the blow of the line, I think. Like, you shouldn't just immediately be like, oh, I'm so sorry that if the thing I just said offended you. It just reminds me of Eminem. Everything he says just feels like he's saying it just to get a rise out of people, and it feels like Conway was just doing that here. KD has a great beat from Murder Beats. Of course, Murder Beats doesn't usually let you down in that sense, always comes with some really fiery and electric production that Conway is really built for. It's kind of crazy to see his progression, because I feel like these beats tend to work for him in ways that I wasn't ever going to expect to see when you first hear his early mixtapes, because they're really nothing alike, but he manages to really kill it here. In terms of how his vocals sound and his tone, you know, the tone to his voice and stuff, I will say once again, you know, just talking about typical stuff about how he doesn't care about your opinion, he's speaking on my legacy, and it just comes across like he actually does care about your opinion. If you're going to say something that much on just one album, you're not going to convince me anymore. I think you do care what people think. You can't just keep saying that you don't care about what people think and then be like, well, actually, I don't care what people think. But you're going to say it over and over again, it just hits a point where it's like, you do care. I mean, most people care, don't they, really? Really? They do. It just wouldn't be as bad if he wasn't always pointing it out. I don't care. You do. I think you do. But anyway, 200 Pies is a track that I was like, Alchemist. I hadn't even checked the production credits, the track list, anything like that until afterwards, and I was like, Alchemist. This is Alchemist. It's just so Alchemist. I checked, it was freaking Alchemist. Yeah, such a laid back and chill feel to this one. Really like it. Just a complete change of pace, especially after that Murder Beats beat. You wouldn't think he'd be able to just switch it up completely and make it work, but I think probably because we've heard him over these beats before, it just ended up sounding like it was a natural fit. And I do like this track as well. I think it's good. Sister Abigail kind of once again changing things up with a more menacing and sinister beat. The features on this one I think are really good. Definitely quite a chilling vibe to this one. It's not totally like, you know, disgusting or grimy. It just has a weird sinister feel to it that I quite like. But then the track that might be one of my favorites on the whole thing, Grace. My God, is this late registration Kanye or what? Most of you probably know at this point, if you've kept up with the channel, that it is easily my favorite Kanye album. So anything that, you know, gets me in the mindset of that era Kanye, I think is just straight away an immediate yes for me. And this totally reminds me of, like, you know, Lupe coming through with his verses, that really like kind of bright and just elevated production that just gives you an instantaneous like motivated feel. Again, the feature here kind of takes up a lot of the track, but I think he sounds pretty good. Jay Skis, I think his name is. Really good track overall. Once again, Conway's showing actually that he's just here to deliver in ways that I still keep getting surprised by. Like, I just wouldn't expect a song like this at all, and yet here it is. Scatterbrain has Jid and Ludacris on this. Honestly, I do think it sounds more like a track suited for Jid, to be honest. I think the beat sounds like something he'd rap over. He doesn't really take much of a shine in the track though, honestly, but Ludacris really brings a pace change to the album, because I think there's just how iconic and recognizable his voice is just on an album like this. Really just immediately just completely shifts the boundaries of everything. I'm just suddenly like from here and suddenly I'm all the way over there. Like, he just manages to bring that in. Some really random and ridiculous lines as always. The bitch and you obituary line, yeah, it's just typical Ludacris, honestly, at this point. It's fun. I like it. I like what he brings here. The final two tracks don't leave me that excited, really. I think Hard to Hustle is pretty standard for Conway. We've heard tracks like this before. And then you've got the Posse cut to close things out. I think there's a few too many of these at this point, actually, which ends up dragging down my overall feelings on the album, because I just think those two tracks just take away from the run of songs up until this point. Like, there's a really great leg of tracks in like the last third of the album, and then the last two tracks just kind of make me feel like, okay, heard this before, bit too familiar. I mean, maybe if we hadn't just had the sinister Sister Abigail, you know, the really uplifting, bright Grace, and then you've got Scatterbrain with Ludacris. Like, maybe if we hadn't just had those tracks that really take a different direction for Conway, maybe I'd feel differently about these final two. But I don't know, man. Are people still excited for these Posse cuts? I feel like we've heard 100 of them by now. I'm not the biggest fan of West Side Gun anyway, so I could have done without this. But yeah, you know what, overall, I think Conway is still delivering on this album. Not in the ways that I think he was on From a King to a God. I still think we've lost a bit of that momentum, but look, there's still some fantastic tracks on here that I think would go up there with some of his best to date. I just think the overall product is slightly weaker, and I think there's just a few moments where I'm just starting to be a bit like, heard this a bit before from Conway, just like with the lyrics, the final 2 tracks. But it's still a good album. Like, this is still good. So yeah, 6.5 out of 10 from me. Pretty close to a 7, honestly, but I think, you know, just those familiarity moments do drag it down just a little bit, ever so slightly, little bit. But good album overall. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I think people are going to really like this one overall. I think, yeah, I'm interested to see. Yeah, I think people would definitely think this is one of Conway's best. I get that. And you know, it's still got some great songs, so let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching this review, and subscribe if you haven't already. Goodbye.